Well, all of us have similar experiences. I had my tryst with COVID. I also treated myself with vitamin C. A lot of my patients are well because of vitamin C. The most recent being a 28-year-old boy who was given up for good, saying his parents were told that he would die in 2 days. 3 days ago, he left the ICU in Bombay at Ghatkopar. This whole 10, 15, 20-minute session that I have is based on just one review. This review that was published, this was published on December 7th, 2020, not too long ago. This has gone through a lot of papers on vitamin C, which have been published, and a lot of studies being done on that. So there is evidence in modern medicine that it works. The only problem is that we fail to see it for various reasons, and I won't get into those reasons right now. So how does the whole paper start? It says that there is limited proven for COVID-19. It also tells you that vitamin C is an antioxidant, it's an anti-inflammatory, it has immunomodulating effects, and thus it makes it a good candidate for using it in COVID for amelioration of infection as well as prevention. So they were looking at it as an adjunct therapy for critical care in COVID-19, and will it work? So they were looking at literature, and this whole review is based on this premise, and it starts with this. So today's focus for the next 15 minutes is going to be, how does this work? What are the mechanisms of action in infectious disease in support of a stress response? And what is its role in treating sepsis and COVID-19? Because today, let me explain this to you. Practically every major ICU treating sepsis patients has in their kitty the use of vitamin C, high-dose vitamin C for sepsis. They're already using it. So it was not something new that they had heard, but they were not willing to try it for COVID. I don't know what was the reason. The evidence that exists till now is that oral vitamin C, that is anywhere between 2 grams to 8 grams a day, could or may reduce the incidence of duration of respiratory tract infection. This is what there is. There is evidence, and that was also spoken of in this paper. Then they go on to say that intravenous vitamin C, 6 grams to 24 grams per day, has been shown to reduce mortality, intensive care unit admissions, and also hospital stay, the length of hospital stay. And most importantly, the time on mechanical ventilation for severe respiratory infections. So for respiratory infections, intravenous vitamin C is supposed to be doing great. This is what they say, and they have quoted this evidence. Now, vitamin C, they introduce the whole way as to why vitamin C is today looked at and what it does. And I will not get into the details, but just that they have mentioned the very fact that we have lost the ability to, the enzyme gluconolactone oxidase, which is required, etc., for ascorbic acid synthesis. So 40,000 years ago, we have lost the ability to make vitamin C. It talks about all this. But it also tells us that there are 2 other species that also have, the primates have also lost it. While all of the other species are dependent on vitamin C, primates also depend on it for food, like man does, like humans do. But it goes on to compare, and this is something very interesting, and I want you to understand this. A monkey, 7.5 kgs, he weighs only 7.5 kgs. What is his daily requirement of vitamin C? 600 milligrams a day. He is 1/10 the weight of a human being. He needs 600 milligrams. And what they go on to show you is that the European Union average requirement is only 90 milligrams for men and 80 milligrams for women. And that is the disparity that we are looking at. If an ape to survive normally, if a monkey requires 600 milligrams, weighing only 7.5 kgs, 75 kg man should require much more to have good health. this is what they kind of put in perspective for you to understand, and that is what they started with in their introduction. They also said 200 milligrams of a daily dose can produce only 70 to 90 micromoles per liter. So this is very important. And you need to understand that 1 gram or 3 grams every 4 hours, that's the highest potential or tolerated dose, that is what is said, gives predicted peak plasma concentration of only 220 micromoles per liter. But what is very interesting is if you give the same dose IV, intravenously, the levels go up tenfold. And this was very clear in this particular study. It's not something that I'm talking about, this paper that I showed you. Now, higher intakes of vitamin C are likely to be needed during viral infections, is something that they have spoken about. They say that you need about 2 to 3 grams to get to the levels of 60 to 80 micromoles per liter. That means not your normal dose that they were talking of, but at least 2 to 3 grams a day is what is required if you are sick. Now, human, so their next whole portion of this particular paper talks about how vitamin C is less in hospitalized patients. I'm not going to give you every one of them, but in all the hospitalized patients, vitamin C was practically non-existent, especially those who were having very bad infections, in trauma, in surgery, and in ICUs. So in various hospitals, they talk of how vitamin C is low. They also talk of the UK's National Diet and Nutrition Survey, which was based on a cross-section of the UK population, and reports that 4% of 65 years and above, and 40% of those institutionalized in care homes have vitamin C less than 11 micromoles per liter. And that's what was considered to be a deficiency. So anything below that is non-existent, indicating the way in which older people with low vitamin C status may be especially susceptible to critical infection. And that was what was seen in the first wave of COVID in Europe. So they go on to after explain what happens in pneumonia, and they show how a prospective study of 19,357 men and women followed over 20 years found that people in the top quartiles of baseline plasma vitamin C concentration had 30% lower risk. That means people who had higher amounts of vitamin C had a lower risk, and all people who had pneumonia had very low levels of vitamin C. So that led to the view that vitamin C may influence, or low levels of vitamin C may influence a patient to be susceptible to respiratory tract infections. Now, they went on to further show studies of how the levels were in COVID-19 patients. And this was in early COVID, that is last year. They spoke about a study done in the US where COVID-19 patients were admitted in ICU, where the mean level of vitamin C was 22 micromoles, hardly. Of these, they went on to show that the mean level for 11 survivors was 29 macromoles, and those who did not survive was 15 micromoles per liter. So you need to understand that the lower your vitamin C, the higher the chances of mortality. And this was kind of found in some of these very small studies that were done. Again, a study in ICU Barcelona of 18 COVID-19 patients showed that the ARDS criteria found that 17 had undetectable levels of vitamin C. Right, so it was so they had a lot of these studies that I put in about 3 to show you. Vitamin C levels are really, really low in hospitalized patients with respiratory infections, pneumonia, sepsis, and most importantly, COVID-19. Now, in the next 5 minutes, let me explain to you some of the mechanisms that they talk of as to how vitamin C works. First and foremost, they talk of vitamin C being anti-inflammatory, immunomodulating, antioxidant, antithrombotic, antiviral. We all know this. But how does it work? It demonstrates direct virucidal activity and has effector mechanisms in both innate and adaptive immune systems. They go on to say that effects of vitamin C on immunity during infection are many, but these also include the maturation of T lymphocytes and the function of phagocytosis and chemotaxis of leukocytes. So it tells you how vitamin C acts in the development and maturation of T lymphocytes. They also go on to tell you that vitamin C also has a vital role as an antioxidant where phagocytes import oxidized vitamin C, that's dihydroascorbic acid, and regenerate into reduced vitamin C, that's ascorbic acid, that can work. They also show you how vitamin C also contributes to down-regulation of cytokines, protecting the endothelium from oxidant injury, and has an essential role in tissue repair. So these are some of the things that you see in COVID. And so therefore, when you look at this, you know that vitamin C is playing a huge role. Then they speak also about the interaction between oxidative stress that you see in COVID and the induction of genes integral to the inflammatory response, including tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-1, interleukin-8, ICAM-1, has been shown to be mediated through activation of nuclear factor kappa B. So vitamin C, they went on to say, lessens the reactive oxidative species and inflammation by attenuation of nuclear factor kappa B. So they give you a pathway by which it works as far as its response to inflammation is concerned. Then vitamin C significantly increases superoxide dismutase, catalase, and glutathione, and decreases serum TNF as well as interleukin-1 levels. These effects of vitamin C may be due to the epigenetic regulation of various genes. That means it upregulates antioxidant proteins and downregulates pro-inflammatory cytokines. This is not the direct scavenging of antioxidants. It works on various genes, epigenetic regulation of various genes. So vitamin C works at a different level as well, at the epigenetic level. Then they're talking about SARS-CoV-2 downregulating the expression of type 1 interferons, while vitamin C actually upregulating these type 1 interferons and hence key defense proteins. So this is another very important action. So you can see the number of actions that vitamin C does in COVID. Now, this is a very interesting one. This is where a lot of noise was made based on the identification of ACE2 as a receptor for SARS-CoV-2. That increased risk of severe COVID-19 is a function of upregulated ACE2, as is found in comorbidities of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and hypertension. Now, SARS-CoV-2 spike glycoprotein is able to bind to ACE2. What was seen in the studies that this team went through was that in human arterial endothelial cells, vitamin C abolished ACE2 upregulation induced by interleukin-7. So another pathway by which vitamin C works and does its job. The critical and often fatal phase of vitamin C of COVID-19 is primarily triggered off by host reaction to dead virus particles, which occur with increased production of potent pro-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines, resulting in the development of multi-organ failure. Now they're coming to multi-organ failure, and what's the reason for that? Then they go on to say that this results in the neutrophil migration, accumulation in the lung interstitium, bronchiovascular space, and this is considered a key determinant for progression of ARDS. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Neutrophil extracellular trap formation, or what is called netosis, is a cell death pathway which is different from what we know, which is normally apoptosis and necrosis, that traps and inactivates pathogens. This maladaptive response that contributes to tissue and organ damage, leading to organ failure. Now, what does vitamin C do? It downregulates this whole thing. It downregulates netosis. So you can see the number of actions that vitamin C is doing. Vitamin C enhances lung epithelial barrier function in sepsis by promoting epigenetic transcriptional expression of protein channels at the alveolar capillary membrane that regulate alveolar fluid clearance, which includes cystic fibrosis, transmembrane conductance regulator aquaporin 5, and the sodium-potassium ATPase pump and epithelial sodium channels. Now, vitamin C enhances cortisol production and potentiates the anti-inflammatory and endothelial cytoprotective effects of glucocorticoids. This is another way that vitamin C works. So all of this mechanisms, how it works in vitamin C is in this one diagram. It decreases nuclear factor kappa B signaling, decreases neutrophil extracellular trap formation, decreases the viral entry, increases interferon production, decreases reactive oxygen species, decreases the oxidative stress, increases the adrenal function, and increases lung epithelial barrier. Not said by anybody, it is published as recently as December 2020. This was a review, and this is what they came up with. Finally, they started looking at clinical evidence, and let's look at some of the clinical evidence that was also looked at. They spoke of the largest trial where intravenous vitamin C in sepsis-associated ARDS which was known as the Citrus-LE trial, wherein patients were given a dose of 50 milligrams per kg every 6 hours for 4 days. It was only for 4 days. That is 15 grams per day for a 75 kg person. Patients in the vitamin C group did not have significant improvement in markers of inflammation, vascular injury, or organ dysfunction, which were primary outcomes. And therefore, they went on to say that vitamin C doesn't work in sepsis. What they did not see, and therefore now it is being shown, and so you have to look at it in light of the other findings as well, that Citrus-LE trial actually spoke of how vitamin C works well, is that there were statistically significant benefits to three of the 4 clinically relevant outcomes. One was mortality, the other was duration of ICU-free days, and the third was hospital-free admissions. Data indicated subsequently that 4-day vitamin C administration, the mortality was down by 81%. But after you stopped vitamin C, because that was not enough, you needed to continue with it, there was no difference between the 2 trial groups. That means it went up considerably. There are currently 45 trials registered on trials of investigating vitamin C with or without other treatments for COVID-19. In the first randomized controlled trial to test the value of vitamin C in critically ill COVID-19 patients, 54 ventilated patients in Wuhan, China were treated with placebo or intravenous vitamin C at the dose of 24 grams per day for 7 days. After 7 days of treatment, the ratio of the oxygenation in the vitamin C group was much higher as compared to the control group, and it kept improving over time, while in the control group it kept falling. So on day 7, the interleukin 6 level was far lower. Now remember, interleukin 6 is responsible for some of the cytokine storm that is caused, and this is mediated by the inflammasome called NLRP3, which also vitamin C downregulates. So and that is why on day 7, interleukin 6 level was shown to be far lower in the vitamin C group. That was 19 picograms per ml versus 150 picograms per ml. That is huge. Okay, the most severely ill patients had better scores of 3 in the vitamin C group, and reduced and had a better and exhibited a reduction in the 28-day mortality. That was 18% versus 50% in those who were not in the vitamin C group. So mortality improved. Your interleukin 6, that's the inflammatory markers, went down. So, and the best part, this study did not report any adverse events. The trial was originally designed for 140 subjects, but they could not do it because there were only 54 patients, as there were no fresh admissions of patients. Now, there are a whole lot of huge trials that are currently going on, and I'm not going to get to it, but I need to tell you that even in giving 1 gram intravenous vitamin C, like done in Chelsea and Westminster Hospital ICU, every 12 hours, together with anticoagulants, has reported 29% mortality as compared to 41% reported by the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre for all UK ICUs. This was in the UK, where just 1 gram of vitamin C has helped you to reduce mortality. There are a lot more, even in hospitals in the US, where people gave 1.5 grams every 6 hourly, they had the lowest mortality rate. So vitamin C actually helps you to bring down the mortality. And these were populations that were comorbid. They had other comorbid conditions. Vitamin C worked there when no other agent was working. Okay. I will not get into this. There were a lot more. Safety, they spoke of safety and they said that it was one of the safest, bearing when you have G6PD deficiency and one or two other conditions where you're not supposed to give it. One was pernicious anemia, another was hemochromatosis. And these are the three conditions they said you should not be using it. These are the only places where you get problems. Other than that, there was absolutely no safety issue, or it was absolutely safe. And finally, let me tell you, this is the protocol that I use, because after extensively reading up what would be the best, I also thank Dr. Lalit Anande because he helped me build this protocol. This is what we use in milder cases. I took 25 grams once a day. I didn't do it TDS or BD or even 4 times a day like was done for Dr. Naik, and it worked for me. But in hospitalized cases, in ICU cases where your SpO2 levels start going down, you need to give it at least 3 times a day, and that is what it works. And this is the protocol which is on your screen that I've used. I've used glutathione twice a day, vitamin C anytime between once, twice, or 3 times a day. 12 milligrams of melatonin, you can go higher. Again, melatonin works on the NLRP3 inflammasome that controls interleukin C mediated cytokine storm. It down regulates that inflammasome. Vitamin D, I like to do it every day. Zinc, magnesium supplements, B12, and steroid.